Okay, my name is Henry G. Davis. I was born in a log cabin, a two-story log cabin in Smyrna, Tennessee. The house is still exists, but it's been covered with siding and another room added to the side of it. I was born to Ruby McKnight and Arthur C. Davis. They divorced when I was 8 years old, and I moved to live with my grandparents at Halls Hill, Tennessee, which is on the Stones River. It's up the river from the Stones River. There used to be a mill there and a mill pond, and it was a favorite place to go swimming. However, polio was rampant at those years, and my grandmother would not let me go swimming because she was afraid I'd contract polio. And I think it's very interesting that knowing how bad polio was, we are this close for the Rotary Club to annihilate polio from the world. There's only two places that exist right now, and one of them is in Africa and one's in Turkey. But the club has done a wonderful job getting rid of that, and I think I have helped with that quite a bit. After living with my grandparents, living with them, I had multiple chores that I had to do as a kid. I got up and milked 3 cows every morning, and when I'd get in the afternoon, we'd milk. I've gotten up, usually helped build the fires in the morning. We had no electricity, we had no telephones, we had no running water in the house, and I lived that way up until my mother took me out of there and I went to high school in Murfreesboro. The farm life was tough. I would get up and do my chores in the morning and catch a school bus, and there's still lights on the school bus when I'd catch it. It was before daylight. And then usually it was getting pretty close to dark when I got home, but I still had chores to do. And in the wintertime, I had to bring in all the wood that we burned in the fireplace, and that was quite a chore. But consequently, during those years, I spent a lot of time with chores and not much studying, so I never did real good in school until my junior year in high school. Then I began to come out and do pretty good. I went to Central High in Murfreesboro. My junior year, they started a band, and my mother wanted me to play an instrument, so she bought me a trombone so that I could pretty well be assured that I'd be in the band. The purchase of that trombone really paid off because I went off to school. When I graduated from high school, I went to Clemson, and that was a military school then and is now. They didn't have girls at the time. And I played in the band at Clemson, and then learned to be a drum major and transferred back to University of Tennessee because I wanted to be with some of my friends there, and that was a disaster because transferring from Clemson, where I had to be in a room every night at 8 o'clock, to a fraternity house where they never went to bed, it was quite a jolt. So my grades weren't too good that year, but I did go with the University of Tennessee to the Sugar Bowl. So I played in the Orange Bowl, the Sugar Bowl, and the Gator Bowl, and not a lot of football players ever got to do that. But it was a good career. I enjoyed Clemson. It led me to a military career, and I transferred back to MTSU and I started the drill platoon that they had there. I had drilling experience at Clemson. I liked that and did very good in military. I started, like I said, the drill platoon in Murfreesboro, and I think to this day it still exists. The military was very good. I ended up being a distinguished military cadet and went into the artillery, went to Fort Sill and through summer camp, and then I was selected as the outstanding cadet and got in well, distinguished military student, and then that led to a promotion, or, well, not really a promotion, but regular Army commission. So I was regular Army rather than reserve, and I became a paratrooper. I had 30 jumps in my career at Fort Benning and Fort Campbell and Augsburg, Germany. Nancy and I married in July the 2nd in 1955, and we went to Germany later. Greg was born while we were in Germany, and we had a good time over there. We didn't get to travel too much because I didn't have that much money, but we came home and moved into Eagleville, where Mr. Frank had his lumber store, and I started to work with him. And Diane came along and took just about all my savings that we had saved up, but he built us a house that we moved into in Eagleville, and after a couple of years, money was kind of scarce, and I went to work with my mother in automotive parts. My stepfather was a garage mechanic in Murfreesboro, and a very good one, and I guess that's where I learned to tell jokes, because he would always, someone would come in and tell a joke and he'd bring it to me, then I'd tell it. And there's a neat thing about a joke: they all create a situation and it's how that person solves it. And all jokes are just alike, they just all do that. The funny thing is, I can tell a joke and I can remember it, and I really do enjoy telling them. The business with my mother in Murfreesboro was automotive parts, and I noticed that a lot of people that came in, and the ones that could spend more money on their cars, all worked at the EDC in Tullahoma. So I put in an application over there, and sure enough, I got a job as an engineering aide. I'm going to digress just a minute. When I was in the service, I gained rank on a lot of people because I had been promoted to first lieutenant a little early because of my reserve background, and then moving to the status of being a regular Army officer. I gained some rank. I did very good in the military. I was well thought of. I did a little bit of everything that officers normally do. I spent a lot of time in the field. We were in artillery, and I used to go up into the plane and fly with the pilot to adjust fire from the air. And I didn't mention it, but while I was at MTSU, I got a pilot's license and learned to fly. In fact, I've taken Nancy up before we were married, and we'd fly over Eagleville on a farm and look at things. So when I was in the service, I'd like to fly the airplane, and the pilot wanted to adjust the fire, so we had a mutual agreement that when we were flying, we had a lot of fun doing that. The job that I got at AEDC, I started out, as I said earlier, as an engineering aide, and I was instrumentation engineer before you could even get a job as instrumentation in college. Now they teach that, but that was very interesting, and I liked my job over there so well that there became an opening for a test engineer, and I applied for it and got that job. And I guess I could say that I had something to do with testing every rocket motor that went to the moon and back, which was quite a feat. The job ended up that the Air Force wanted to start a quality control program. I ended up being a supervisor of quality control for the rocket test facility and did very well with that. And then I guess my wild side came out, and I decided to leave, and I took a job with Minnie Pearl Chicken, and it was getting started at the time, and I was in charge of purchasing all of the equipment for the chicken stores and getting them opened on time. And I think in a 9-month period of time, we opened 213 or 215 chicken stores, about 10 roast beef stores. There was another chain called Mahalia Jackson. We opened about 35 of those. And then Minnie Pearl Chicken went tumbling down, and people in Omaha had contacted me and wanted me to move out there, and I went to work with Johnny's American Inn, which Johnny Carson and the Swanson brothers started up a little company, and they were going to serve hot dogs and chickens in a special. And I took that job, and we ended up building 3 stores, and they decided to close it. But during all that time, I had been in charge of the sign program, and I had met several people from Los Angeles with Federal Sign and Signal, and I asked them for a job, and they gave me a job. And the first job that I had was to change out all of the Richfield signs in the 7 western states to Arco, and I had a timetable that I had to meet to do that, and it was practically an impossible job. In fact, when I took the job, the vice president told me that they had planned on losing $750,000, and if I could lose any less than that, I could have the job. So I took that job, and I ended up subbing out all the jobs to other sign companies for the installation, and that was quite a unique feat that hadn't been done in the sign industry before. And I didn't lose any money. In fact, I made almost $1 million, and I became another hero on the West Coast. And while I was out there, there was something real funny that happened. One day, a group came to me and wanted to know about changeable messages, which you see now all over, but the system involved a test that we put up. We got a pickup truck and opened the doors on the back and put this traveling message sign up over the doors, and we jumped over the fence, and I ran down to house and plugged it in on the porch. We didn't see anybody at home, and I just plugged in the electricity, and we set up a demonstration up on a closed section of interstate that wasn't opened yet. It was a new interstate, and that led to the California buying signs, and Federal built them and installed them on the interstate that were capable of turning the traffic around and going the other directions. For instance, if there was a load of spilled oranges down the street, they could say that and tell you where to get off, and it became a big plus, but it never went across the United States. It just ended up in California. Then my vice president got transferred to Chicago, and of course he tapped me on the shoulder and he said, "You're going with me." So we moved to Wheaton, Illinois, moved the family there from Los Angeles, and the children enjoyed it. We had a nice home there and did good, and I got put in charge of the J.C. Penney program on a coast-to-coast basis. And every time Penney would open up a store any place, I did the signage for the outside on it, and had a great career there. And then Nancy's mom passed away, and her daddy came to Chicago and said, "I think it's time for y'all to come home." So we came home, and I wanted to build a store in Franklin, and he had another couple of locations he was interested in. But I won out, and we built a store in Franklin, and every time somebody would come in the store, as lumber and building supplies, they said, "You can't find it in Franklin." Well, I put a challenge that you could find it in Franklin, and our store built up. That we had opened a store in Smyrna, one in Franklin, and we bought a store in Spring Hill. So Crosland Supply Company did real well. And a few years back, somebody came in and wanted to buy it, and it was sold at that time to ProBuild. My nickname from my grandmother was Pick, and she's about the only one to ever call me Pick, but I went by Hank and a couple of names at Clemson that I don't want to mention. Games, when I was growing up, there wasn't a lot of equipment. There wasn't anyone sponsoring anything, and we lived too far apart to get together. But at school, I'd play a little bit of baseball in the summertime, but not much. I was never good at it. And in high school, I was too skinny and too frail, too light to play basketball. I was tall enough, but I wasn't good at it. But I got in the band, and the band was my game. That's what I really did enjoy, musical instruments. An interesting story, when I was in the 4th grade, my mother wanted me to play the piano, and she sent me to Kittrell to school, and I had to change buses and get all the way to Kittrell and back from Halls Hill. And Ms. Ayers, the funeral director, Ayers in Murfreesboro, was my piano teacher, and at the end of a year, she said, "Henry, I've got a suggestion." And I says, "What is that?" She says, "Take up something else." So I never accomplished very much with the piano. As a teenager, I learned to dance at a girl in Murfreesboro taught me to dance, and I belonged to a high school fraternity, and we had 2 dances a year. There was another fraternity had 2 that we went as stags, and then sorority had 2 dances. So we were very formal for our high school dances and a good time. But when I moved to Murfreesboro, I went to Woolworth, and they were needing a stock boy, and I took a job with Woolworth in 1943, I believe it was. All the men were over fighting, and I was home with students, and I had to go in and clean the store every night. And in the summertime, I worked a full job, and the job consisted of a full week was 67 hours that I put in, where there wasn't any such thing as 40 hours a week. The job paid me $12 if I put in a full week's work, and I started a hobby of collecting silver dollars, and I had every dollar that Woolworth took in put in my paycheck, and some weeks I'd get 1, some months I'd get 2, but I saved those up until I got ready to get married, and then I cashed them in to get a ring, and oddly enough, I only got $1 a piece for all of them when I bought the ring, but that was life. That's the way things turned out. The best vacations that I've ever had were all fishing trips. Of course, Germany. Nancy and I went on several places in Germany and enjoyed it. But after I had been with Crosland Supply for a number of years, I kind of put together myself a group of people that we went fishing with, and I've been fishing in Venezuela, Mexico a couple of times, northern Saskatchewan, about 50 miles from the Northwest Territories, a place called Hatchet Lake. I went up there about 10 times catching northern pike and Arctic grayling. They were a lot of fun. Then I've been to Alaska 3 different times fishing, and in Vancouver a couple of times. But the best fishing hole is at Queen Charlotte Islands. It's on the north end of Queen Charlotte Islands. They've got some big salmon up there, and boy, that is more fun to catch. It takes about a minute per pound to catch one, and the largest ones I've caught 4 that weighed 34 pound, but I was fishing with a couple of guys one trip, and one of them caught a 62 and the other one caught a 74. No, 67 and 74. But that's my sport. That's what I always enjoyed. But I haven't been fishing lately. I'm looking forward to another trip. My friends and I would usually drag race around the streets of Murfreesboro. I had a couple that we didn't get picked up by the police, but one night we were out on the south side of Murfreesboro and a siren went off. And I said, that's in the vicinity of the high school. The high school was in an old building that had been a woman's school in Murfreesboro. And we drove over there and looked, and sure enough, the fire department was over on the side next to the gym. And I was in the band, and the band instruments were up on the second floor. And I remembered we didn't have band instruments because the high school had burned before I started there, and all the instruments were burned up. But I said, let's go up and see about the band instruments. So we went up, and oddly enough, on the second floor, the Coach Pate, lived there, and his wife was standing out in the hallway. And I thought, well, it doesn't appear that the fire's over this way, it's at the other end. So I went up on the second floor to the other end, and the firemen were down beating on the door trying to get in, and I went down and opened the door and let them in. Well, the next day I was in the principal's office wanting to know how I could be there before the firemen got there. And I explained my story, but I didn't really get into trouble, but they really questioned why I was there, because the coach's wife told them who was up there on that second floor, and I got cleared. We didn't start the fire, but it was some people that lived upstairs on the third floor, and a mattress had caught on fire, and they'd thrown it in the gym, and then the fire department was there for that reason. Now, when I was on the farm growing up, before I went to live with my mother, I did several things, and I was always in trouble for doing something. In fact, one time I remember I was riding my bicycle, and a black snake ran across the road, and I ran the bicycle tire up on the snake, and I caught it, and it coiled all around my arm, and I thought this would be fun to show to my grandmother. So I put it behind my back, and she was in the garden, and I walked in. I says, Mama, look what I've got. And boy, she said, you get that snake out of here before I take this hoe and cut off his head and yours too. So, but I want to tell another story. When I was 12 years old, my uncle had been drafted into the service, and there was no one to take my grandmother to church. I had another uncle that didn't go to church, so my mother took me to Murfreesboro and got me a driver's license when I was 12, and it was written on the driver's license I could drive my grandmother to church. And the roads back then had gravel on the road, and you followed, as long as you followed in the tracks is all right, but if you got to the side a little bit, you'd pick up some gravel and they'd hit under the fenders of the car and make a racket. Well, somehow or another I was making a racket, and my grandmother looked over my shoulder, and when we got home, she told my uncle I was doing 40. Well, I got a beating of my life for doing 40 with Mama in the car. But a week later, I'm driving, and I said, Mama, how fast am I going? She looked over and she says, Lordy, you're doing 40. And I says, Mama, that's the oil pressure gauge. I said, here's the speedometer, and I'm doing 25. And she said, well, you needed a whipping for something, so we won't talk about that. There wasn't a lot when I was growing up as a kid. My mother was working in Murfreesboro, and I'm living with my grandparents. And I was born during the Depression, and didn't anybody have anything, and didn't anybody know to have anything. They didn't know what something was. But I went through some very, very light Christmases with practically nothing. But I didn't know the difference. But we had popcorn strung to hang on the trees, and we made paper things to hang up there and put little balls of cotton in there and tried to decorate. But I remember one year my mother gave me $1 to buy my Christmas with, and I bought my grandmother and mother a box of cherry chocolates, and they cost $0.25 apiece. And I had 50 cents left. I bought my teacher a handkerchief, and my brother a little squirt gun, and then I think I took some of the money and bought me some oranges. We moved from Wheaton, Illinois to Franklin in 1971, 72. And Franklin was a small community, didn't have a lot of businesses. In fact, when we wanted to go out to eat, we had to go to Nashville. There weren't many restaurants in Franklin, and we just had to struggle with it. But I wanted to build a house. We were living in Laurelwood Apartments, and they wanted 6 months for me to live there, and I thought, well, we won't be there 2 months. We ended up being there 1.5 years till I built this house on Bowman Road in Franklin. And when this house was put together, we built it right. We built it, of course, we had lumber and building materials at the store, and the store was building up at that time. And Franklin went through a tremendous amount of growth during the time that I was running Crossing Supply Company in Franklin. In fact, I've been told by people that we helped to make Franklin what it is today, and I'd like to think that. I have had membership in the Rotary Club since I think 1976. Mr. Jimmy Armstead came to me one day. He was editor of the paper here, the View Appeal, and wanted to take me to Rotary, and I told him I didn't think I had time to go, but I did. I joined Rotary, and through the years I went all the way to the top. I was the president. Of course, I held all the chairs, and I've been the program chairman, and I'm still in Rotary, and I love Rotary. And like I said a minute ago, the club's main project is, in the national sense, is getting rid of polio, and they've done a good job of it. The second thing was the Chamber of Commerce. I got very interested in the Chamber of Commerce. I got on that board, and I became the president in 1980, and I'm still involved with the Chamber. I go to ribbon cuttings and a lot of things like that. So I've really enjoyed the Franklin Noon Rotary Club and been a member of the Chamber of Commerce. My friend in high school, Bill Taylor, was invited to go to 4-H club camp at Columbia. He was going to be an all-star, and he didn't want to go by himself. And high school we had just graduated from high school, and he asked me to go with him. And I decided that I would go with him, and all of the people from Rutherford County were staying in the same hut. And there was a contingency of 4 or 5 people there from Eagleville, and we were all in the sleeping together. And the boys in there said, "There's a girl here we want you to meet." And I said, "Who is it?" And they said, "Well, it's Nancy Crosland." And her boyfriend was in the room, her present boyfriend. And on Wednesday, they took me over to meet Nancy, and he was in the water, splashing water on her. And I walked up behind her, and the first word I heard her say was, "You can go straight to hell." And she wasn't talking to me, she was talking to him. And that looked like a challenge to me. So that weekend we had a date. They came and got me, and that was a funny thing. We went, he had a Jeep, and he and his brother and another person came, and we went to Cheville to meet some girls over there, and they had cooked chicken, and we had a picnic, and we went through Bell Buckle and picked up a girl. And by the time we got from Cheville back to Bell Buckle, our Jeep was out of gas, and we had to get diesel fuel from her daddy to put in it. And needless to say, I didn't get home until 2 o'clock. And by the time I got home, my mother was on the phone calling her mother, wanting to know where I was. And of course, didn't anybody know, but I got in a little trouble for that, for staying out so late. But Nancy and I dated for off and on for 7 years before we got married, and we've had a wonderful life together. We've been married 58 years this July the 2nd. I was in the field at Grafenwehr, Germany, and we lived in Augsburg. And I got a call from Nancy saying she had to go to the hospital, and I tried to find a way to get home, and the only thing going back to Augsburg was a deuce and a half full of used tires, and I got a ride in that back. And when I got there, it was like 5 o'clock in the morning or 4:30, something like that, and I went straight to the hospital. And coming out of the field and smelling like I did, they wouldn't even let me in the room. And I went home and took a bath and came back, and Greg was born right after I got back. And that was in Augsburg, and he was a little over a year old when we came home. And the next thing I know, right after we got home, Nancy was pregnant with Diane, and we were living in Eagleville, and Greg was pretty tough on Diane. He tried to drown her in the kiddie pool and everything. He'd sit on her, and we'd have to sit Diane up on a cabinet in a basket to keep Greg away from her. But I had my job then at Tullahoma, and I was driving from Eagleville to AEDC to work, and we decided it'd be better if I'd move over there. So Nancy found a place over there, and then along came Susan. So Susan was born in Manchester, and Diane at St. Thomas, and Greg in U.S. Army Hospital in Augsburg, Germany. So we've had a good time together. I've traveled a lot with them. Like I said earlier, I'd moved around. I wasn't afraid to move, and wasn't afraid to go out and look for a new job. And the fact that we did move around, we got to see a lot of the country that a lot of people never see. We saw so much country because we lived in those sections. You know, raising 3 children, their ages were, Greg and Diane are 2 years apart, and Diane and Susan are 3 years apart, so that makes Greg and Susan 5 years apart. And there's different disciplines that you have to use when children are that far apart. But we had a little Rambler station wagon when we lived in Tullahoma, and the children were younger then, and I had a styrofoam mat in the back that covered the whole back, and they would lay back there, and they kind of had a club. We'd come home to Eagleville and drive back on Sunday. We'd been there eating a hamburger or something, and they'd lay back there and enjoy it. But the Tullahoma years were nice years for the children. Susan started to school in Tullahoma. Then I moved them to Omaha, and Susan broke her leg on a bicycle and had to wear a thing on her leg for a couple of years. But Greg was always ahead, and when I moved to California, I would come home and we'd get out in the yard and play ball, and usually Susan and I'd take on Greg and Diane playing football. And I remember one time we couldn't get past them to score, and I told Susan to run around the house, and she did, and we scored. But Greg always thought that was unfair. Greg started to high school after we moved to California, and I would let him drive to school, and he learned to drive doing that. Diane didn't start to high school till we got back to Wheaton, Illinois, and then I had Greg and Diane both in high school, and Susan was close enough and that she walked to school and come home for lunch. And then we moved back here. Greg was a junior in high school at Franklin. Diane was a freshman, and Susan was in grade school. And then Greg graduated and went off to MTSU to school. Diane graduated a couple of years later and went to UT in Knoxville. And then 3 years later, when Susan graduated, she also went to UT in Knoxville. So I guess you could say our orange blood runs deep. And Greg is MTSU. His two children, I have 6 grandchildren, 2 from each family. And Greg's 2 children both graduated from MTSU in Murfreesboro. Diane has got her youngest one in Knoxville right now. Her oldest one went to Cookeville, and he's working in heating and air conditioning with the Wofford Air Conditioning Group. And Susan graduated from UT in nursing and took a job at Vanderbilt. And today, Greg is a contractor building houses. Diane is a couple of years from retirement at Lipscomb as an elementary education guidance counselor. And Susan is living here in Franklin, and she works at Vanderbilt, and she's on in pacemakers, heart pacemakers, and she's got 3 doctors she works for, but they're all very successful, done very well, and my grandchildren are following in the same footsteps. They're doing very good. I was working at AEDC, and I was in an office when Kennedy was shot that someone had turned on a radio, a little portable radio that they were listening to, and they made the announcement that Kennedy had just been shot in Dallas. And I remember one of the guys in the office saying, "I sure hope he doesn't die because they'll make a hero out of him." And y'all all know the story that happened after that. But people have a tendency to know where they were. I'll go back and digress a minute. When Pearl Harbor was bombed, I was living at Halls Hill in 1941, and I remember that came over the radio, and the radio that we had, my grandmother only listened to soap operas on it, Pepper Young's Family, Young Widow Brown, and Ma Perkins, and some of those stories. And she was listening to something that said that the Japanese had invaded Pearl Harbor, and that was a big thing. People give me a sense of joy and peace more than anything. I enjoy meeting people. Entertained a lot by some of the stories that I've told, jokes mainly that I remember through the years. It's just something about people that I really do like. I don't think I've ever really met a stranger. If I did, he wasn't a stranger too long. I'd find some way to get him to talk or find out something about him. And I've learned a lot over the years from communications with people. It's the greatest thing in the world. I really enjoy being around people. And I've enjoyed, that's one thing I think about my fishing trips. A bunch of men out having fun and doing the man thing, and me telling jokes, and just a lot of fun. I would say that the turning point in my life, I've had about 4 of them. As I mentioned, I was in the sign business, I was a rocket test engineer, I was in the fast food business, and I was in the lumber business. So each one of those points were really turning points. It was doing something different. It was new water to tread. It was, thank goodness it wasn't too deep because I didn't drown. And just meeting and working with people and solving problems was my forte. That's what I enjoyed doing. I mentioned earlier putting up signs in California. That whole project just lasted 4 months, and in that 4-month period of time, I was responsible for getting 57 and a half signs a day put up for 120 consecutive working days. That was a feat in itself. And then building the lumber store here in Franklin, and knowing people well enough that they welcomed me into the Chamber of Commerce and into the Rotary Club was it wasn't a turning point. It was an established point. We hadn't talked too much about hobbies. I've got 3 hobbies. I was living in California, and I was doing a lot of traveling, trying to sign up all of these companies to install my signs. And on the airlines, they'd always give you two drinks, and sometimes I'd drink both of them. Sometimes I'd drink one and put the other in my pocket. And I took the bottles home and put them in a shoebox. And one day I'm looking, and I set them out, and it was very interesting. So the next time I got on the airline, I looked to see something I didn't have, and I would pick those up. And then there were very few states at that time that sold miniature liquor bottles. And when I'd go to some state that had them, I'd go in the store and look around and buy a few. In my travels overseas to a lot of the countries we've been to, I would find a liquor store and go in and buy miniatures. I have 3,000 that I tell people that if they can find 2 alike, they can have one of them. Now there's some alike down there because some of them are in sets, and in a set, I've got them set as a set, but that particular bottle may be loose on another shelf. But the second thing I did is, being in the hardware business, I learned to collect knives, and I belong to the Franklin Knife Club, and collected knives. I have quite a collection of pocket knives. They're all serial numbered. But I guess that if I had advice that I wanted to give people, I would tell them to get a hobby, some hobby, something they like to do, something that you can be off by yourself. You don't have to have anyone around you, and it gives you something to do. It has a purpose in life, and my favorite motto is always be fair. I don't care what you're doing. It doesn't make any difference what the chore is. Chopping cotton, chop your row. Always be fair. And I've used that as a motto to my grandchildren. In fact, a few years back, I gave each one of them a little knife, and I had engraved on the knife, always be fair. And I think as long as you're fair, who can be against you? You know, I've always enjoyed a joke. I can't remember a clean joke. All my jokes are usually what they would consider as being dirty jokes, but people enjoy them and they laugh at them. But I can think of one that just a couple of months ago when I was sick, a friend sent me a get well card, and he told a story about fishing, and they said he was fishing and he ran out of worms, and he looked and there's a copperhead snake over there with a frog in its mouth. So he knew that a frog was a good piece of bait, and the snake couldn't bite him, so he reached over and picked up the snake, pulled the frog out of its mouth. Then he wondered about turning the snake loose because it might strike at him, so he opened up a bottle of Jack Daniel and poured Jack Daniel down the snake's throat, and the snake seemed to relax a little bit, and he released the snake, put his frog on, and sitting there fishing, and all at once he felt a nudge, and he looked, and that damn snake was back with another frog in its mouth. Another joke I remember, this couple are lying in the bed, and suddenly the man turns over and puts his arm over his wife and starts his hand down her back and back up around her head, and then over her face and down across her breast, and then all at once he stops and turns over, and she says, "Honey, why did you quit that? I was beginning to enjoy it." He says, "I found the remote."